The Building Bridges program is amazing.
Very glad I came out today.
And we want to get together in a way that we can engage, unite.
Building bridges, which is a powerful concept. Building bridges, bringing people back to the community.
Not just on Sundays, but every single day of the week.
What I feel is most important is to build our bridge with the youth and young adults, to make that gap so that they will be reconnected or connected with the Eucharist.
We've had a chance to actually apply and talk about real life within the parish, and have come up with some things that I think will be very helpful.
I thank the diocese for organizing this. I thank everybody who made this possible.
Every single parish could benefit from the information, the sharings that go on during this day.
A lot of different types of bridges that we could and should be building within our parishes and with our families.
You know, every day, in every way, Catholics are learning about their faith. The difference is when we get together as good stewards, if our formation leads us to action, leads us to tasks, and calls us to what we can do in our parishes and community, it's excellent. We've had that kind of day today.
It is so good to be here with you. I cannot tell you how many conversations have brought us to this day. I want to let you know from the outset, our hope is by the end of this day, you will be ready to go back to your parish having thought through some immediate next steps. We're not good. This isn't a program that we're going to be talking about, but we are going to be making some real concrete suggestions about some beginning points for building those bridges. And that's what this day is going to be about. Now, I have to share with you just something kind of fun as we get into the heart of our topic today. I have a friend who is a youth minister, and she's the mom of twin boys, Nick and Zach. And Nick and Zach are kind of precocious in the way that sometimes children are. And because there are two of them, Marcy has her hands full. So when the boys were about 5 years old, Marcy started posting on Facebook something that she called things you don't expect to hear from the back seat. You get the picture. She's got these two boys, and of course at that point they're still in the rear-facing car seats, and they're having their own little conversations. And mom and dad are in the front, and they're overhearing what the boys say. So she started sharing these things. The boys are now 11 or 12, and it just sort of morphed into just things that they talk about at home and things that she overhears and so on. For instance, one time, one of the boys, Marcy says to the boys as they're getting ready to go to reconciliation, you know, I feel like I confess the same sins over and over. And Nick says, well, yeah, Mom, that's why I go to a different priest each time. One Sunday, they happened to get to church early enough that they were looking at the missalette. And Marcy says, do you know that if you went to Mass every single day for 3 years, you would hear the whole Bible? And Zach says, yeah, Mom, but if you decide to do that, you can leave us at Nana's for the next 3 years, all right? But one day, and this is the one that I love, one of the boys says, I don't think God ever ignores. And the other one said, no, but he sure is shy about talking sometimes. And I think that's a bit of a good lead-in for what we're going to be thinking about today. Because we do want to help people to have that encounter with Jesus, to really develop a life of faith that directs their lives. And out of that life of faith that we all live and grow in together, we grow as a community of disciples and stewards. And that's the vision, the big vision that we're going to hold out in front of ourselves today. We're going to think about how do we develop that community that really is the place where disciples are grown, the place where people are led to live their lives as good stewards of all of our many blessings. Now, I have to tell you, I have been so inspired by so much of what Pope Francis has shared with us about his vision for the community. And I want to share with you just briefly this little glimpse that I believe leads us directly into thinking about how we build those bridges. And this is taken largely from paragraph 24 of the Joy of the Gospel. You know, the joy of the gospel is Pope Francis's vision for the evangelizing community. And that evangelizing community, where each of us, as members of Christ's body, lead one another to a deep relationship with our Lord. And then we lead our family and friends and the people that we work with and the people in our neighborhoods, we lead them to that relationship with Christ. That's a really big vision to hold out in front of ourselves. But Pope Francis says that first begins with an openness to an encounter or a renewed encounter with Christ's love daily. Each of us has that relationship with Christ that's already burning in our hearts. That's what leads us here. But we have to be open to that renewed encounter with God's love, because that's going to give us that spirit, that desire to share that love with others. And out of that encounter, we are led to go forth as missionary disciples. But Pope Francis says that's going to happen to a great extent in our parishes, in that evangelizing community. And he says the evangelizing community has an endless desire to show mercy because great mercy has been shown to us. I don't know about you, but for me, this whole Jubilee Year of Mercy has been just this ongoing reminder of the merciful love of God and the blessing that is in my own personal life. And within our communities, when we find the way to share that mercy with one another, not only does it make a difference in the lives of individual people, but it also makes a difference in the life of the parish community. He goes on to say, we need to try a little harder to take the first step and to become involved in people's lives. Not in an intrusive sort of way, but what he would say is that way of accompaniment, that way of walking with each other. I love that our opening prayer referenced that Emmaus journey, because for me, that's the image of the community walking with each other in those most difficult times, in those times of doubt, in those times of struggle. And yet Jesus is with us on that path. And when we live that life within community, we realize that the evangelizing community gets involved in by word and deed in people's daily lives. It bridges distances. We've already named some of those distances, haven't we? Some of those distances are cultural. Some of those distances are by way of life circumstance. Some of those distances are generational. Some of those distances are our own internal spiritual journey that we're struggling with, or maybe we're joyful about, and we're looking for someone to share that with. He goes on to say, the evangelizing community is supportive, standing by people at every step of the way. And then faithful to all of this will bear fruit. You know, the steward is the one who recognizes that all that we are and all that we have and all that we ever will be is pure gift from God. And our response to that gift is gratitude. And out of gratitude, we give back. And we recognize that Jesus is the first teacher of what it means to be a Christian steward. And we see that Jesus' way is the way of self-giving love. And so, as a community that is the body of Christ, we grow in that way of gratitude. We grow in that way of self-giving love. And the more we do that, the more our community will grow in that way as well. We wanted to share with you just briefly something that Bishop McElroy has said about all of this. He says, we are called to be instruments of transforming this world by transforming the hearts of men and women and children who come to us in faith and seek encounter with the Lord. It's going to be up to each of us, and then we will build those bridges to the people around us, and so it goes. So I want to share with you just briefly, and I know some of you have heard me tell this story before, but I want to share with you just briefly a bit about the importance of that deep sense of belonging. Because this is really key to everything that we're going to discuss beyond this point. That deep sense of belonging that the researchers, the people that study faith communities, call engagement. That engaging people in the life of the community of faith really draws people to live and grow in faith in deep and wonderful ways. I'm not going to dwell on this, but I think it's important for us to have this as a piece of the larger picture of that evangelizing community. The research that I'm going to share with you has been done by the Gallup organization. You all know Gallup as the people who do the Gallup poll. But it turns out that's actually a small part of what they do. Most of their work is actually in helping organizations, schools and hospitals and businesses and nonprofits and faith communities, helping to those groups to grow in such a way that they fulfill their mission. And what their research shows is that in faith communities especially, when people have a deep sense of belonging, they actually are more likely to be spiritually committed. They're more likely to live as disciples and as stewards. And in fact, what their research says is when people have that deep sense of belonging, they're more likely to say that they pray every day. They're more likely to say that they'll forgive others when they've been hurt. They're more likely to say that their faith helps them to find meaning and purpose in their lives. Those people who are engaged, the ones who have that deep belonging, are willing to take a stand on account of their faith, even when it's unpopular to do so. They find a different sort of inner peace, and I love this one. They speak words of kindness when encouragement is needed. Oh boy, do we need that. We need a lot more of that in our world. Those engaged people are much more likely to invite others. Here's the big one. The research actually says in most cases, believing doesn't lead to belonging, but rather belonging leads to believing. So when we think about building that evangelizing community, that community that's going to build bridges, we can start with how is it that we are leading people to really understand that the community is theirs, that the parish is theirs. And really one of the bottom lines in this research is every person needs to know that he or she is valued. Every single person has a sense that I belong here, that I have the opportunity to contribute, as you said, that I have the opportunity to understand what it means to belong here. So interestingly, at the very foundation of this process is people need to have a sense of what the expectations are. Because every relationship has expectations. And if we're going to really belong together, we have to know what is it that we expect of each other. Because that makes a big difference. If the kind of unspoken expectation is, I can come to Mass and I can leave, then that's the expectation that will be fulfilled. But if when we come together as a community, there's an expectation that everyone is truly not only hoped, but expected to be actively participating, that makes a difference in the way in which people begin to understand themselves in relationship to the parish. Now, I'm not saying it happens overnight, but I have seen dramatic change in parishes when they begin to clarify the expectations. And in fact, I was given the opportunity earlier last year to speak to all of the clergy in the Diocese of Orange. And one of the priests, right before the first break, said, I have to tell you, Leisa, I heard you talk about this about a year ago. And he said, and I went back to our pastoral council, and I told them, I'm ready. We need to clarify expectations. We need to have some of these conversations with our people. And do you know what? It wasn't me that held us back. Our pastoral council said, oh, Father, we can't do that. I want you to know that at the break, he was surrounded by other priests that were going, we'll help you. You can do this. It's really hard at first to think about what is it that we expect of one another. But when we begin to think about it in such a way as to say, this is what it means to be that evangelizing community, to keep that larger picture in our minds, to engage people so that it's not just Sunday, but it really is every day in which we're living and growing in faith, then it's worth all of that and then some. So very briefly, just so that you're aware, the research also describes 3 groups of people that every parish has to one extent or another. Some people are engaged. They're the ones that are already deeply rooted. You probably know them by face and by name. They're the ones that you can count on. At the very last minute when you go, oh my gosh, we've got this thing coming up this weekend and I'm not ready and I need help, they're the ones you're going to call. Because they already know the impact of the parish in their life of faith and the way they live their faith in their lives. We've already described those engaged people. They're the ones that invite others. They're the ones that give of their time and their financial resources. They're also the ones that are spiritually committed. They're the ones that, they're going to come to the Bible study or the mission or whatever it might be. They're the parents that help in our religious education programs. They're the youth ministry volunteers that are there week in and week out. They're the ones that are in the choir and the Knights of Columbus and the Women's Sodality and all of those groups that we know have such an important role in our people's lives. But they're a small group, and we know that too, don't we? A lot of us will say, in my parish, the 20-80 rule prevails. 20% of the people do everything, and the other 80% just kind of come and go. Actually, that's not too far off from what the research tells us. We'll look at that in a second. The majority of people, however, are not engaged. And the thing that you need to know about the not engaged is they're not negative. They're really, in many ways, just waiting for someone to draw them in. They're not likely to answer an announcement, however. They're not going to hear, we need a 3rd grade catechist or we're not going to have 3rd grade. And all of a sudden they call the parish office and say, I think I could do that. That's not what's going to happen. But they are likely to respond to personal invitation. They are likely to let themselves be drawn in, just that little toe in the water, if we find the ways to give them the opportunities to do so. Those not engaged people, however, they're not negative, but they're less likely to invite, and they're more likely to leave. They're the people that kind of just drift away. Sometimes, and we'll look at this in a minute, sometimes for real reason, but more often just because they get out of the habit of coming. And you know, they really have that sense in the back of their minds that I could be gone and nobody would know that I was even missing. And so they do. They leave. Now, I have to tell you, I had a real personal experience with this a few years ago, and it taught me something really important. 8 years ago, next month, my husband and I moved from Cincinnati, where we had been for 23 years. We were actually gone for 4 years, and then we ended up moving back. That's a different story. But in that move, it happened that was when my husband and I did this very prayerful discernment about what I was going to do in this next time of ministry. And we made the decision that I would begin to write and present full time. And so just as we were making this move, both of our children were now living away from home. I was living in a town that I knew no one, and I was traveling. So not because of anything that happened at our new parish, but just because of who I am and what was going on in my life, I really very quickly became not engaged. My husband, on the other hand, same circumstances, except he's now home by himself a lot, called the parish office and said, "Put me to work." Yeah, I know. I thought, oh my gosh, does he have any idea what he's getting himself in for? The first thing was, well, so what have you done in your previous parishes? And he says, well, you know, I was part of the RCIA. I was an RCIA sponsor. And they said, oh, good, we need our RCIA team. Okay. And then he joined the Knights of Columbus because he wanted to be able to serve with other men. And then one weekend I was gone, doing something kind of like this, and I called home and he said, you know, I think I'm going to have to learn to say no. I said, so what did you say yes to this time? Well, so the DRE called and they really need a 5th grade catechist. He still is a 5th grade catechist, by the way, 8 years running now. He did a brief stint at 7th grade, and then this past year went to the religious person and said, can I please move back? Here's the interesting thing. I came home after about a month away of, weekends, and I went to Sunday Mass with Steve. And at the end of Mass, he was in the vestibule talking with different groups of people. And I literally found myself backed up against the wall, arms folded, foot tapping. Couldn't we just go home? And I caught myself and I thought, oh my gosh, I've become not engaged. It happened so easily. It happened so quickly. And what the researchers actually say is we have about 6 weeks. We have about 6 weeks when someone comes to us the first time to catch them before they become not engaged. We can engage them later on. It's just going to take us a little bit more effort. We have about 6 weeks to help people to make that initial connection so that the parish community becomes theirs, so that they belong. Now, there's a third group of people, and that third group of people are actually in 2 groups. One of those groups are the people, they're called the actively disengaged. Some of them are the ones that we might think of when we hear that. They're the ones that we saw not too long ago at Easter time. They're the ones a friend of mine calls the flower people because they only come to church when there are flowers. You get the picture. Christmas, Easter, First Communions, funerals, baptisms. And then my friends on the East Coast say you have to add ashes and palms. And then you get the full picture. Yeah. And here's the thing. We do a lot of worrying about those people. We know what they're missing. We want so much for them. And yet, we don't always realize that there are things that we could be doing within the community that could make a big difference. We'll talk about that in just a second. There are a second group of actively disengaged people, and unfortunately, every parish, every organization has a few of these folks. They're the ones that the researchers actually call the cave dwellers. They're consistently against virtually everything. They're the ones that always have a fuss. They always have a complaint. And they drag us down in a different way, don't they? Because, we worry about them. We're trying to figure out how to solve whatever it is that they're fussing about, knowing full well that we're going to solve this one and they're going to come up 2 weeks from now with something else to fuss about. So here's one of the big nuggets that I hope you will hold on to from all of this. The research actually says, here's what we need to do. Not that we're not going to pay attention to those actively disengaged people, flower people, cave dwellers, but we are going to spend at least as much time, if not more, and energy and attention building up those who are engaged and building on what's already working in our parishes. Because it's those engaged people and those things that are helping to engage people that are going to reach out to the not engaged. They're with us every Sunday. They just come and go and come and go. They've not planted themselves deeply in the community. And it's those people, as they begin to realize that their lives are changing, as they become more engaged, they begin to reach out to the actively disengaged. That's the process. And I can't tell you how deeply I've been changed by all of this as I've seen parishes be transformed. When they really begin to look at, every parish already has some things that are working. As you thought about your hopes and dreams, and we're going to do this in a little while, as we think about those things that we really hold on in front of ourselves, we begin to realize there are already things happening in our parishes that we can begin to learn from, that we can build on, those bridges that we can start to build. So here's what the research says about all of this. About 16% of Catholics nationally are engaged. So that's not far from that 20/80 thing. Another 49% are not engaged. They're the ones that are the real evangelizing opportunity. They're the ones that we really have the opportunity to reach out to. And then that means 35% are actively disengaged, either flower people or cave dwellers. I'll tell you a real quick story about this, and then I want to give you a few minutes to talk about this at table. As a parish staff person, one of my blessings was to direct the catechumenate, the RCIA, for 10 years. And I was always on the lookout for people that might be with us as part of the team, either teaching or just accompanying, being those companion people for our candidates and catechumens. My parish did not do weekly evening prayer, but we did during Advent and Lent. And so, those evening prayer times were often the moments where the engaged came. It was like I could walk into church and I knew every single person in that church for evening prayer. It's kind of like Holy Thursday. We know what that's like, right? But there was one woman that I knew because I knew her father. But she wasn't involved. She was there every single Sunday. I saw her at evening prayer, and she always lingered after prayer. Sometimes she'd just sit. Sometimes she would sort of pick up programs and, kind of straighten things up. And so one Wednesday evening, I came to her after prayer and said, "Colleen, could we talk for just a few minutes?" And she said, "Sure." And I said, "I'm wondering if you might be willing to consider being part of our RCIA team." She happened to be a teacher. She's a special needs teacher. And she looked at me and almost with horror and said, why would you think that I could do that? And I said, Colleen, please, first of all, no pressure. But I said, here's what I see. You're a person of prayer. You come all the time. You obviously see a value in being here for prayer. And that's something that I would really like to bring to our people. You don't have to teach. You don't have to say a word. I just would love you to be present to our RCIA candidates and catechumens. Just sit at table. And she said, can I think about this? And I said, sure. And so a week passed. And the next week at evening prayer, she stopped me. And she said, are you really serious about that? And I said, yes. And she said, you know I'm a single mother. Yeah? And that would be okay? Absolutely. So she had in her mind an impression that because she was a single mom, she couldn't get involved in parish. I said, absolutely. I just want you to be present with us. She was part of the RCIA team for 8 years. And she moved. And I stay in touch with her by way of Facebook. And a couple of weeks ago, I got a message on Facebook. Leisa, I need to ask for your prayers. I've been diagnosed with breast cancer. And you're one of the first people that I'm reaching out to. What a difference an invitation made. It was the Holy Spirit. I didn't know her, really. I just saw her and had that sense that she was ready to be engaged. That's the process. That's how we begin to build bridges. So what I'd like to invite you to do at your tables for just a few minutes, and maybe just in pairs or threes this time. We're not going to report back from this conversation. But I want you to have an opportunity just to think in your own life, what difference has belonging made for you? We're going to take just 5 minutes. What difference has belonging made for you in your life? And then we're going to move quickly into the next portion of our time. So here's the thing. We knew when we walked in this room this morning that there are all sorts of people that are not deeply connected to our parishes, didn't we? My guess is that's part of what brought you all here today. And it's actually why I began to think about what we're sharing. Because as I travel throughout the United States and have these conversations with people, what I began to hear from parish leaders and from diocesan leaders is we've got to make this not easy, but simple enough that everybody knows that there's something that we can do. Otherwise, it gets really easy just to kind of say, you know what, this is just the reality that we're dealing with. And we just sort of let it go. And yet, parish people don't want to let it go. We have a lot of hopes and dreams because we understand the impact of a strong parish community. And we know that our people need that. So what I want to share with you is just a little bit of what we're learning from a number of different studies about what's going on in the lives of the people of not only the United States, although most of the research that I'm going to be citing is U.S. study. I was recently up in Canada working with a couple of dioceses there, and I actually got into all of the research around Canadians, and it's very much the same. This is a Western world experience. I was in Australia a few years ago when one of the bishops there said, "Tell it to us straight, Leisa. It doesn't help to sugarcoat things." I thought, wow, okay. So here's what we know about what's going on in the U.S. First of all, we know that many people who grew up Catholic are not remaining Catholic. That while about 1 in 4 people in the United States was raised Catholic, fewer than 1 in 3 are living as Catholic Christians now. And we also know that a number of the people who are leaving are our younger adults. And we'll look at that in just a few minutes. We recognize that there are some people who are coming into the church, but it's not matching the people who are leaving. 10% or more of Americans identify themselves as former Catholics. That's huge. And in fact, in some of the studies, we actually find that the second largest religious group in the United States are people who call themselves former Catholics. Wow. Now, I believe there still is a little glimmer of something there because they still identify in some way with Catholicism. And so I believe that there may be a little crack in the door that we might be able to go through in order to invite, in order to welcome, in order to build a bridge. We're going to think about that. Currently, our younger adults are leaving to a greater extent than older adults. We have people that are leaving that are older, but it's much more prevalent among younger adults. And here's one of the big things, because almost all of us in this room are of a certain age. Not everybody. We do have a few younger adults, thanks be to God. But here's one of the important things to know. I had a number of friends who left for a while. Probably a lot of us did. And then people came back by way of marriage or baptism of child or death of a parent. That's not happening to the same extent with our younger adults. They're leaving and they're staying gone. And that's really important for us to know. We also have kind of two groups of people that we hear about. We hear about people who consider themselves spiritual but not religious, right? Yeah. And then we have people that call themselves or are identified as the unaffiliated. The researchers find there are so many of those people who don't belong to any congregation that they actually have given them a name. They call them the nones, N-O-N-E-S, because on the surveys when asked, what denomination are you, they answer none. So just quick show of hands. True or false? Let's just see about this and tease it out a little bit. Would you say the spiritual but not religious are not members of congregations? How many people would say that's true? The spiritual but not religious are not members of congregations. Yeah, actually, that's interesting. It's actually false. Yeah. The majority, over 65%, of people who identify themselves as spiritual but not religious. And in fact, over 15% of Catholics say, I'm spiritual but not religious. So here's part of the distinction. We have a lot of people who have that hunger for God. They're looking for a spiritual dimension in their lives. But they're not so sure about the organized church, the hierarchical church. And it's not just the church. They're really suspicious of all organized parts of our life. And so we need to be aware of that. Second, true or false. Again, show of hands. Those who are not religiously affiliated are most frequently found among younger adults. How many would say that's true? I've actually already kind of given you that one. Yeah, that one's true. But here's the interesting thing. So the unaffiliated, those who do not have any membership in any congregation, are a stable and yet growing segment of the population. How many would say that's true? Yeah, that's actually the trick question. So they're growing, but they're not stable. And we'll talk about that in just a minute. So let me just give you just a little window into some of this. The spiritual but not religious. Slightly more men or slightly more women than men. More common among younger adults. But the majority of them are affiliated. So some of the people who come to Mass on Sunday and then leave have this sense that, yeah, there's a spiritual something that's going on in my life, but I don't really find expression in the church in the way that others might. Yeah. They very likely are the not engaged, yes. And could even be some of those actively disengaged that just come certain times of the year. They still are considering themselves Catholic, but they're not regularly attending. So yeah, good insight. Now, what about those people that are unaffiliated, the ones that the researchers call the nuns? And all of a sudden, oh, there we go. So about 30% or more of adults under the age of 30 are unaffiliated. That's huge. Over 30% of our young adults in the U.S. and in Canada and in the Western world are not affiliating. They don't belong. They don't feel a sense of belonging. An interesting newer study, and one of the things I wanted to let you know is all of this information that I'm giving you, at the end of the day, we're going to give you a web link that has all sorts of background information. And one of the files that's in that web link is a page that has all of the studies that I'm drawing on. And it actually has live links, so you can click on it, and it will take you directly to that document. And one of the newer ones that I want to share with you is something that Joseph shared with me. It's a study about former young Catholics. So here's some insight into some of these younger adults who now consider themselves former Catholics. Many of them still say they believe in God. And in fact, about a third of them pray. And they report that importance of prayer in their lives. They're actually really suspicious, though, about what they perceive as being a narrow or rigid teaching in the church. Now, those of us who are involved in faith formation, I think we already have this sense. That doesn't mean we don't teach. That doesn't mean that we don't share with people what we believe as Catholic Christians. It does mean, however, that we need to have that openness to some dialogue. That it's not this, thou shalt, but let me draw you into this. And we know that that's going to be a process. They also have the perception of us that faith stands apart from science and reason. And so we have a real responsibility to share with our teens and our younger adults that faith is not at odds with science and reason. And that's a real need among our younger people. I find this really interesting, and I want to quote directly from this study. Catholic youth need to be shown that they can simultaneously, seriously believe, practice, and profess their own faith while appropriately respecting and honoring the faith of others. And that's really important. There's a lot right there that we can learn from and that we can be aware of. And again, if we're building this evangelizing community where every person is of value, part of what we're doing is we're developing a community where people have the real opportunity to share their questions and their doubts and their wonders. Years ago, I was with our Faith Formation Commission at my parish, and I always managed to invite a couple of our teenagers to be part of our Faith Formation Commission. So these were the people that were overseeing all of what was happening in faith formation for our parishioners. And one year, one of our young people, Molly, was a junior in high school. And we were talking one time about what happened in our middle school program and then on into youth ministry. And Molly started kind of like shaking her head. And she said, you all think that everything's fine out there, but I have to tell you, it's not. And then she kind of stopped and she looked at me and she said, is it okay if I share? I said, absolutely, Molly. What's going on? And she said, so she acted as a classroom aide in our religious ed program. So she knew what was happening. And she said, here's the thing. We get to about maybe end of 6th grade, beginning of 7th grade, and all of a sudden, the teens start asking questions. The kids start asking questions. And the catechists aren't really sure how to answer those questions. So they stop inviting the questions. And all of a sudden, they just start teaching, quote unquote. And so I really thought about that. As the catechetical leader, that's huge. And so I talked to our catechists and I said, if you don't feel comfortable taking the questions of the kids, then we need to figure out something that we can do that invites them into these deeper conversations. And so I said, what would it be like if I came in, maybe once a semester, and we just did locker room? Let's just talk. Let's just entertain all of the questions that the kids have. Well, the catechists were like, yeah, let's do that. And so I had a stool, one of those big kind of like bar stool kinds of things, and I took it classroom to classroom, and we just did locker room talk. And I did all the 6th grade 1 week, and then I did all the 7th grade 1 week, and then I did all the 8th grade 1 week. Molly, as the classroom maid, was sitting in the back of the room, beaming. She gave me a big thumbs up. You got it. But I think we have a lot to learn about how we help our young people to really understand that we are a community that wants them to have that encounter with Christ and to grow in their faith in such a way that they live it in their daily lives. Because here's the thing. What we know from the studies is that most who leave the faith of their childhood do so before age 24. So we have a real short window of opportunity in which to really engage our young people. And study after study after study points to the importance of parents and engaging parents, but also of the wider community and the impact of the wider parish in helping to draw people into that living faith. Here's the thing about the unaffiliated not being a stable group. We're in a 2nd or 3rd generation now of people who are not belonging to congregations. Many of the teens and younger adults who grew up in an unaffiliated home are now beginning to join congregations. They're coming because they feel like they looked at their peers who went to church in childhood, in high school, and they felt like they were missing something. They feel called to worship. They have that spiritual hunger that they don't know what to do with. So here's what I'd like to invite us to do. And I do want to let you know, we're going to take a break in just a few minutes. So I know you've been sitting for a long time. I want you to know that that break time is on its way. But I want us to think about, for just a few minutes, what is it that people are seeking? What are they looking for? Now, again, broad generalizations here, but we see some patterns that I think are important for us to recognize. First of all, people are looking for a spiritual dimension. They have that hunger. Each of us has been created by God with a spiritual hunger. We have that sense that something's missing in our lives when God isn't there. And so we recognize that. And in fact, David Kinnaman, who is the president of the Barna Group, Barna does a lot of study about religiosity, especially among younger adults. And he's quoted as saying they, our younger adults, need to see spirituality as connected with all of their life, not a compartment within their life. We need bridges between Monday to Friday and Sunday. That comes back to what you said at the beginning. It can't just be a Sunday thing. There's got to be an everyday element to this. And I'm more convinced now than ever that what's good for our younger adults is good for the rest of us. So while we're learning from some of the research around younger adults, we know that the things that we think about in terms of younger adults, a friend of mine says, the thing about younger adults is they vote with their feet. You know, if we're not meeting their needs, they leave. Where people our age maybe will stay just out of a sense of obligation. Yeah. So what's good for younger adults is good for the rest of us. So that spiritual dimension, we need to really think about that. That engagement research that we talked about, after meeting expectations or having that sense of what the expectations are, the next piece of that is people need to know that their spiritual needs will be met. And I want to share with you a little about that as well, because here's the thing, people also need that personal connection. They need that sense that I belong here as the person that I am, that I'm connected. So I got really interested in this whole thing about spiritual needs because the other studies, the Pew studies and so many of the other studies that are out about the unaffiliated and about the people that move from one congregation to another, those studies say 3/4 of the people who leave say they didn't feel their spiritual needs were being met. And actually, one of the articles that you'll find linked on that file that I mentioned is an article that was written by, now all of a sudden his name is escaping me. It'll come. But anyway, he's a priest. And he wrote this article about his sister who recently joined a Baptist congregation. And he actually went to her re-baptism. Yeah. And one of the things that she shared was, I just didn't feel like my spiritual needs were being met in the Catholic Church. And so then he opens up the conversation about this. This is something we need to be thinking about. So I actually created a survey that you can actually give your people about spiritual needs. It's available in English and Spanish. And I did this just as a way of hearing, what are our own people saying about their spiritual lives and what helps them to grow spiritually. And I want to share with you what I've learned thus far. We have currently a little over 4,500 responses. Now, this is not a random survey of the kind of the Pew Forum or Gallup or Barna or any of those. This is actually much more like a great big focus group. But at 4,500 people, it's a big focus group. And here's something that we're learning. I asked people, think about your life. How would you describe your relationship with God? Would you say that deep faith shapes your life or that you have faith that needs strengthening? I know just a tiny bit over half say they have deep faith that shapes their life. But many people, over 40%, say they feel like their faith needs strengthening. Now, I think we could probably relate to that. I think at any point in our lives, any of us could say that, right? Yeah. These are people, by the way, that are coming to Mass and are motivated enough to actually go online and answer questions. A few of the parishes that have participated have given people the opportunity to do it in writing, and then they go in and add, the responses. But for the most part, these are people that are willing to go online and answer the questions. So then I asked, what helps you grow spiritually? In all of my conversations with the people at Gallup, one of the things that they said that they've learned is, if you want to know something, ask it. Just ask it out loud. So, what helps you grow spiritually? The order changes a little bit based in age, and I'll share that with you in a second. But the 4 that are very consistent, by the way, people are given 14 different options, and they're told check as many as apply. So here are the 4. Participation in Mass, thanks be to God. About 86% check that as one of the options. Daily prayer, belonging to my parish, and having good friends who share their faith with me. Now, that's very consistent with everything we've already talked about, right? Because there's that inner relationship between our personal relationship with God and then that communal dimension. Younger adults put belonging in slot number 2. Teens, no surprise, put good friends in slot number 2. But it's the same 4, regardless of age. What helps you find meaning or purpose in life? In this order, almost across the board: family, faith, and friends. Again, no real surprises there. For those who said they have faith that needs strengthening, what would you really participate in? Not what would you like, but what would you really do? Number one response: having a faith mentor. I didn't want to say spiritual director. I thought that might be off-putting. Not everybody even knows what that is. But that brings to mind, again, it's about relationship, isn't it? We want people that are going to accompany us. We want people who are going to be our companions. What would it be like to go to our confirmation sponsors and say, think of yourself as a mentor? Would that change anything? Yeah, maybe yes, maybe not. I don't know. Or our RCIA sponsors. And then people are looking for a way to contribute to the mission. The mission of Christ, the mission of the parish. The younger adult studies especially say our younger adults are motivated by opportunities to contribute when they know that they can have an impact. In other words, time is precious. Our people are not going to go do something if they don't realize or think that there's going to be some impact from what they're being asked to do. And we need to offer people those opportunities to do what the study folks call micro-volunteering. In other words, let's not go to our people and say, I need you to make a commitment for the next 3 years. One time some adults at my parish were thinking about a new women's ministry, and they said, Lisa, I know you don't mean it this way, but we read the bulletins about new faith formation opportunities. So much of it sounds like, come, be with us. We're going to meet every other week for the rest of our lives. And this one woman said, I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow, let alone the rest of my life. So how do we find those ways for people to take that first little step? And then out of that first step, they get drawn more deeply to the community and through the community to Christ. So, here's where we're going. How are we going to do all of that? We're going to build bridges. We come right back to where we started this morning. We come right back to the point of this whole day. We're going to build bridges. And we're going to think in a number of different ways in the rest of this day what are the bridges that we need to build? And then how are we going to begin to do that? Now, I want to share with you just really quickly something about these pictures that are up here because I learned something in the process. I find the older I get, the more visual I am. And so I was working on this thing, 3 or 4 years ago now, and I was sitting on my computer and I was putting all of these images of bridges on the screen, and I was moving them around. And for me, every single one of those bridges means something just a little bit different. And so I had just finished this, and my husband came and stood behind me, and he said, what are you working on? I went, it's kind of a new thing. He goes, well, like what? And I said, well, it's about how we need to be bridge builders in our parishes. We need to build bridges. And he didn't say anything. He just kind of went, And I thought to myself, oh my gosh, he's a bridge engineer. I couldn't make this up. He builds bridges. This is what this man does. I'm sure there was a subconscious thing going on there, but here's the thing. All of a sudden, I thought of this in a whole new way, because I know that when Steve designs a bridge, there's a lot that goes into it. He doesn't just go slapping steel up and hoping the people are going to drive across it. They have to look at how deep a foundation are we going to have to build? How far down are we going to have to go in order to make this thing viable? They look at where are we trying to go? And they literally say, what is the approach that we're going to need? Sometimes they can't change everything. They need a bridge, and they can't change where it goes. So they have to deal with whatever the situation is. There's a bridge that crosses the Ohio River between Milton, Kentucky, and Madison, Indiana. It's called the Milton-Madison Bridge, and if you want to see something fascinating, Google it. And there is a YouTube video. It's a bridge that my husband was involved in a very small way. They could not change where the bridge went. They couldn't tear down the old bridge until the new one was ready, because the next nearest bridge is 40 miles away. And there are people that work on one side of the river and live on the other side. So they kept the old bridge. They built the new bridge in sections. They ferried it across the river. They put it together. And then very quickly, they tore down the old one and they moved the new one in place. And there's a time-lapse video of them moving this bridge. A friend of mine said, look at how many people it takes to build a bridge. But what do we learn from that? Sometimes we have specific situations in our parishes that we can't change, even if we wanted to. How are we going to build bridges anyway? What do we need to think about? What are the approaches that are going to best help us to build bridges among our people? How are we going to do this in a way that suits the needs of our particular parish? And one of the reasons that we're going to do the processes that we're going to do today is what works for one parish may not work in another parish. We can learn a lot from each other, but then we have to go back and do the hard work about thinking about how are we going to do this in our parish. You saw the banner. This is what Pope Francis has said. You know the word pontiff, which means pope, means bridge builder. Did you know that? Yeah. Pope Francis uses the image of a bridge a lot. This is one of the times. He says, the Lord made bridges. Christians who are afraid to build bridges and prefer to build walls are Christians who are not sure of their faith, not sure of Jesus Christ. Build bridges and move forward. I think there's something really important for us to hear in that, because sometimes, very inadvertently and very unwittingly, we build walls. We don't mean to, but we do. And I think we need to ask ourselves some of those hard questions about, are we building walls at times rather than bridges? Because here's what we know. Bridges are built person to person. So each of us has the opportunity to go back to our parish and build a bridge. And we help those who are involved in ministry with us to understand that they are bridge builders, that they have an opportunity and a responsibility to build bridges to the people that they touch. And out of that, we form that evangelizing community. Because here's the pattern. We've already talked about it. The engaged reach out to the not engaged. And the not engaged, in their own way, in their own time, through their own witness of their lives, they begin to build bridges to those flower people and those cave dwellers. It doesn't all happen overnight. I will tell you, in a lot of parishes that I've worked with, it actually happens a little bit more quickly than what people expect. And I think there's a real sense of, if we roll up our sleeves and we leave here today really taking to heart our call to be bridge builders, it may happen in ways that only the Holy Spirit knows. So what we would like to do, and we're going to do the instructions for this next segment of time in English and Spanish so that everyone understands what we're about to do. We want to begin to have conversation at table about what we've heard thus far. I want you to know there's another segment of input, of content later this afternoon. But just based on what you've heard thus far and all of what you're thinking about, when you think about your parish, what bridges need to be built? What bridges need to be built? And here's the thing. Somebody needs to be the recorder, and just in really succinct, a couple of words, a few phrases, capture the conversation. We're going to begin the conversation in just a few minutes. We're going to come back for lunch, and then we're going to continue the conversation. So I want you to know you're going to have a good chunk of time to really dig in and think about what bridges need to be built in your parish. However, I want you to be as realistic as you possibly can. Doesn't mean don't dream, but also let's not be pipe dream, right? Let's think about, really focus, what bridges could be built in your parish. Ernesto has some directions for those who prefer or feel most comfortable discussing in Spanish.
Vamos entonces a dividir el grupo en español y en inglés. En español tenemos en la salida de la izquierda, hay un salón a su izquierda otra vez, para que ahí podamos tener el taller en español. Todavía falta otra sesión de teoría, pero lo que vamos a hacer en este momento es hacer una lista de los puentes que verdaderamente pueden construirse en cada una de nuestras parroquias. Pedimos que en ese taller haya una persona, un secretario, una secretaria, que haga la lista, solamente la lista de los puentes, porque el último trabajo va a implicar la segunda sesión. Así que les pedimos, por favor, que sigan las instrucciones. Allá son las mismas instrucciones, pero allá vamos a tratar de, si no se entendió algún concepto, tiene también la oportunidad de hacerlo. Vamos a tener este tiempo, luego vamos a venir al almuerzo y después del almuerzo todavía vamos a tener que ir al cuarto también de allá de español para terminar nuestro trabajo y luego venir a una plenaria aquí entre nosotros.
So we had a group of people who did their discussions in Spanish. And I've invited Ernesto to begin our sharing time, and he's going to give you just the highlights of some of their ideas about bridges that our parishes could build. After Ernesto has shared, then we're literally going to go table to table, and each table gets like 1 minute, 2 minutes to do your little highlight for your table. Remember that what works in one parish may not work in another, but yet we have an awful lot to learn from each other. And my guess is there's going to be some real similarities in what you've talked about, but my guess is we're also going to hear a lot of different ideas, and all of that's going to be good. So we're going to let Ernesto go first.
Okay, we have like a Leisa say, a group from the Spanish speaking, and we got something like 12 bridges. So we reduced to only to 4, usually to 5. We have a very interesting group because we have we have people from the golden age, we have young adults, and we had people in the middle age. So it was a very, very great group. So it's about different, like Lisa said, this really a lot of interest in the family, in the society, and the life of the parish, and liturgy, of course, and nobody's talk about pastors, but that's, I don't know, that's a good signal, but I try not to make influence in nobody. So I want to invite Efrain.
Well, we were talking, we came up with a lot of bridges, but we have the 4 main ones. First one, bridge number 1, is a bridge between the liturgy and the catechism. Bridge number 2 is a bridge between the ministries of the parish and the community as a whole. The third one is a bridge between the community and its families and all the problems that it has with all the obstacles of the society. The fourth one is a bridge between the active presence of the youth and the young adults with the parish life. And we also came up with brainstorming, we came up with an extra one, which is a bridge between the different languages without losing the meaning of the message. That's what we came up with.
I think you just gave us enough for the next 5 years. But wow, even just to take one of those bridges and really brainstorm ways to take that to heart, what an amazing thing that could be for our church. Thank you so much. I'm actually going to play like MC here, and we're going to ask, who's reporting for this table? There you go.
Good afternoon. Our group, we had a very lively conversation, and we were actually split during the time talking, but when we came back, we realized a lot of what was discussed is similar into different parishes. But the one bridge that we would choose in our group would be the bridge to the young adults. What we know is Jesus has the 99%, but he's going to go and look for the 1%. And that 1% could be our youth and young adults. So what we'd like with that bridge is we'd like to help the youth and young adults connect to the Eucharist or to reconnect back to the Eucharist. They may be getting all this cheering and nice suits at other churches, but they're not getting the Eucharist. And we have the Eucharist. We just need to help them find their way back to the Eucharist. And the other thing that we think is just really important is we need to re-engage the parents in education, in going to Mass, and being involved. A lot of parents drop youth off at church and don't stay. How do we connect with them so that we can support them so that they come as a family?
I want to share just real quickly something that he alluded to that I think would be good for you just to kind of keep in the back of your mind. When my pastor and I first had the opportunity to meet Dr. Al Winsman, who is the author of the book on engagement from Gallup, my pastor was and still is very concerned about the big non-denominational churches and the way they tend to kind of, draw people to them, especially our younger people. And so Father Jan asked Al about that. And this has always stuck with me. And now the data is starting to bear this out. But this conversation happened 10 years ago. Al said, from the standpoint of what we know from the research, he said, you can be aware of what's going on out there, and you can certainly learn some things in terms of, some of the practices around hospitality and welcoming and so on. And he said, but here's what I want to help you to understand. He said, those places have really big front doors, but they also have really big back doors. And he said the average stay tends to be about 8 months. And Al is a Methodist minister. And he said, what I think sometimes Catholics lose sight of is you have the Eucharist. You have the sacrament of reconciliation. Don't ever forget that. And about 8 years later, we invited Al to come speak to people at our parish in an adult faith formation evening. And it was a big gathering, so we were in church. And Al was standing kind of in front of the sanctuary and doing that sort of almost preacher pace, And he had slides on both sides of the space. And at the very end, he had built in a blank slide. And he essentially said the same thing to our people. He said, I don't know that you really grasp the grace of what you have here. And he said, but when you say, this is my body, this is my blood, you know that truly is Christ's body and blood. And he said, and I have been and will forever be envious of that. And then the next slide was Teresa of Avila's Christ has no hands and feet but ours. And he said, could we please pray this prayer together? There wasn't a dry eye in the house. And Father Jan actually looked at him after and said, thanks a lot for showing me up. But I think there's something really important there. because sometimes I think it takes someone coming kind of from the outside to remind us of what we have and the grace and the blessing and the importance of all of that. And I just happen to think of that based in your ideas. So thank you so much for that. And with that, we're going to go back to this table.
Well, we came up with quite a few too, mind-boggling actually how much work there is to do. But we thought it would be fun to focus on building a bridge between the people that were there for sacramental preparation, and perhaps for them it was a entry door to bring them into engagement. So going from sacramental prep, because they're there to get something, check something off their list, to become fully engaged in the community.
Thank you. I'm going to try not to weigh in on every single one. But I will tell you, Dr. Christian Smith, who has done a lot of research on younger adults, especially emerging adults, says that in his look at the younger adults who are staying, many of them are saying, I don't know if I believe everything that I've been taught. I don't know that it's really important to be at Mass every single Sunday. But I do want my children to be given what I have been given. And so they bring their children for sacramental prep. And we have the opportunity to really engage people at that moment and then let that carry us into a real sense of community and belief together. So thank you for that. And with that, who's at this table?
So the bridge that we wanted to talk about was the actual bridges between the different cultural groups that are within the different parishes. At St. Rita's, we have maybe 8 different cultural groups, and the Filipinos being the most there in St. Rita's. But we also have the Samoan group, the Chamorro group, African American. So we all do our work in silos. We work for the church, but we don't look from side to side at the different cultural groups. So we need to build bridges so that we not only work for the work that we're doing for the church, but also to be inclusive of the different cultural groups so that they can understand what we're doing. And we can work towards one goal, the goal of our parish and the goal of our Catholic Church.
Thank you so much for that. Who's up here? Who's reporting? She's been appointed. There you go. Or
Voluntold? Yes. We talked about connecting bridges with communication, and this is in regards to ministries within the parish. So a lot of ministries don't know what other ministries are doing. We end up having to look at the bulletin and say, oh, this is going on. Well, let me promote this. We need to fix that, and once we do, we would like to build bridges towards the parish as a whole. We need to create community building events, and again, this comes after we have communicated. We would like to strengthen the ministries and then reach out to the entire parish community.
I'll tell you that in a lot of places where we've had this conversation about bridges, that's actually one of the very first steps, is the folks who come to a day like this go back and they begin to convene their key leaders, those ministry coordinators, pastoral council, committees, those people, and share with them some of what we're talking about here. And I want to tell you that background page and also the workbook has processes that you can do in order to have that day. That background page that you're going to get the link to actually has tiny little videos that you can use in a day like that with your parish leaders so that you have the opportunity to talk with them about building bridges. Who's here? All right.
Well, we thought that we would get away with nobody will think of this one, but that table over there thought of that one. We also talked and thought about building bridges in a sacramental life, because that's what we as Catholics do best, right? Our sacraments. I remember going to a class with Father Mike Murphy for spirituality, and he said, let's think about our sacraments this way. We're running a 10K run, and we can run that run without stopping for any nourishment along the way, but how much better and easier would the race be if we had those stepping stones of protein and water? That's what our sacraments are. And people come. We have all levels. We have the baptism, the young babies. Think about them all being in nests. They're all in nests. And they're supposed to fall out of those nests into the church life and then go back to the next. But we have a disconnect because we can see who we baptize. Look at our sacramental registers. Who we baptize, how many get the first communion, and what happens by the time they get to confirmation? What happens when it's time for them to be married? So we need to do a better job of keeping those sacraments as the ha-ha moments, but having opportunities for them to dive into the church deeper and deeper, not just for community life, but the conversion experience to know Jesus Christ better.
Amen. Thank you so much.
A popular one, I guess, is the cultural integration. That is one bridge, I think, that every one of us, that we need to work on building. There are many things that we do. Mass celebration, we do every day, okay? Feast day celebrations, we do every so often. And a lot of things within the parish that we celebrate that we can do, not just as Filipino feast, Spanish feast, or whatever feast it is. These are things that we can do together. We have our own Catholic cultural things that we do. And these are beautiful things that we want to celebrate, and we want to celebrate it together. We want to share them, and this is one way, sharing them is one way that we can build these bridges so that everyone would understand what these celebrations are about, okay? Why are the Filipinos doing that? Why are they doing that? When you celebrate it together, you will learn about them, and you too can be one. And when we do that, okay, we can be one people in communion with each other. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And you know what I love about this? You really are taking to heart that thing about be specific and really be practical. And I love that. And I think you're going to see, as we get into the afternoon, how much this is all going to tie together. So be keeping track of these bridges, because we've got a lot to learn from each other.
With our discussion at our table, communication was a big thing between the pastor, whom we at St. Elizabeth Seton have Father Michael Robinson, who is wonderful. We have 42 ministries within our church, and he has met with each one of the ministries, and he's going around. But what we want to really focus on is the ministry of the bridge with the youth and how they can bring the generations together, because they can work with the grandparents. They can work with their siblings. The siblings look up to them. And if they're involved in masses and involved in all activities in all aspects of the church, they will bring together all the generations, and we can go out and spread the word.
The only bridge that comes to our minds is the bridge of the family, between the family and the pastor. And the family, if you watch Blue Bloods, see how they have Sunday dinner and they start arguing and all that? That's a family, okay? And we expand the family to the cultural part. In Good Shepherd, we have so many Filipinos that all the volunteers are all brown. Then we have the Vietnamese, Hispanics. Now we have the people from Sudan. We have Lebanese, we have Indians, you name it. So we don't have the Samoans yet, but they'll be coming. See, if we build the bridges with the pastor from the family perspective, then we're building something, because as we know, the family is the nucleus of society. That's why the family is always, the marriage is always between a man and a woman, period. Okay, anybody disagrees? See, nobody disagrees. And then the children are supposed to follow. And if the husband and the wife, the parents, do what they're supposed to do as Catholics, the children will follow. Okay? Bring them to the dinner table, and that's 75% of it. And if we do that with the whole parish, can you imagine having a potluck with all the foods from all these places? Oh, my Lord.
All right, thank you. Who's reporting over here?
Hi. Pretty much echoing the same theme here of integrating the various diverse ethnicities in our parish. We chose bridging, instead of a pastoral council, maybe the bridge of stewardship. Reaching out to the various groups, various ethnicities of all ages, young, old, and sharing with them and communicating with them better about our parish, what's going on. Just like this lady said, they're doing something, somebody's doing something. It'd be nice if we all knew what was going on. I think this is so essential when you have a diverse church. And and the 3 T's of time, talent, and treasures that we can all offer to our church and to the different ministries that we belong to.
I'll share a story really quickly that connects some of what we've already heard. I had the opportunity to go to the parish of Stephanie Moore, who is the co-author of the Bridges Workbook. And they had already had a meeting of kind of that small core of leaders. And they were ready to have a Saturday day of reflection with everyone who's involved in ministry. And they invited me to come up for the day. And so we talked about bridges, and we talked about how we're all in our own little swirl, but we really need to be aware of what everything else is going on in the parish, and really be looking at yourself as a bridge builder, and then how might you build bridges to the people around you, and so on. At the end of a day, 2 women came to me, literally linked arm in arm. And one of them said, I want to share with you what we decided, the first bridge that we're going to build. And I said, okay. And she said, she's the coordinator for our readers at Mass in Spanish. And I'm the coordinator of our readers for Masses in English. And she said, and we've never even met before today. And she said, so we've decided that we're going to bring all of our readers together for some common formation. I was in tears. It was like, oh my gosh. But talk about an impact in a parish just with something very simple and yet not easy. And so I asked Stephanie, I said, because Stephanie reads at Mass, I said, you have to let me know what happens. And sure enough, a couple of months later, Stephanie got an email saying, here's the date, everybody planned to be there, and now they're doing this twice a year. And so it's a very simple way of taking a lot of what we're talking about and actually acting on it in a particular way.
We pretty much touched down on every bridge that's been mentioned, except for this one. It's more than just getting our youth leaders who step up from not just getting newly confirmed to be able to work only with their peers in youth ministry, but to get them represented on the bigger parish level at the pastoral council. So one of the things that I know is my job as coordinator of youth ministry is to help the rest of the parish know that the young people are not the worker bees, because they have plenty of good ideas. And they are the ones who really evangelize their peers. And at my history with this parish, they've always brought guests, and it always makes me drop my jaw. I'm like, why are they here? Because I asked them to. And why do they stay? Because they like it. Who knew? So just really recognizing the gift of our young people as more than just people who can lift heavy things, but really being able to engage them on a wider level and to recognize that they have so much more to offer than just being a number at a parish and how many have been confirmed?
I think a lot has been said. I think we all have we're all in the same boat, I think, when we are all sharing the same needs and concerns. One of the things that was brought up here to parishes that are represented here is the need for reorganizing as a parish council or pastoral council, whatever, so that all ministries can work together for the common good of the vision of the church, of the mission of the church. We've heard a lot of how we're working individually, or we don't even know each other. We don't know who's doing what, or have limited resources, and yet collectively we come together. We can unite, and that was the other thing, that we really need to unify as a church and build that community and bridge all those different cultures and look at ourselves more in what brings us together and makes us more, we have more in common than we have differences. And if we can recognize our own common being what we have in common rather than what makes us different, and coming together as a parish, unifying and helping people to belong, because that's building what you've been saying, building that bridge of belonging, and people will want to stay. I think in the bottom line is this will create a sense of stewardship that will make it a way of life. It's not a program, it's not something else, but it's how we live our lives, and we can be those models. We can be stewards to one another and build our church.
Thank you. Wow. I think you guys are the last, but not the least.
We had a lot of the same issues come up. One particularly that we focused on, though, was, for us, it's the intergenerational, because our parish, for a very long time, was an older community, retired community, and just in the last several years, for the 4S Ranch area and places around here, we now have sort of the opposite end of the spectrum, a lot of young families with children. And thank God our parish is already a welcoming parish, so there hasn't been that kind of tension, but just we haven't really integrated the groups like you guys have been speaking that often. And we were discussing things like with the women's fellowship, maybe coming once to the younger moms group, and the moms group can go with them, and together they can discuss spiritual things and be strengthened in their faith from each other. You know, the mentorship of the older women, but also the older women learning from the younger women and what things are like out there now with children. And also just integrating, you know, as mentioned, the youth, and we were saying integrate the youth into the normal parish life in the sense that they should be lectors during the normal schedule, not only at a youth mass, you know, have ushers and things like that, and just really try to bring the groups more together for our united faith, that realize no matter how different we are age-wise, culture-wise, etc., it's still the same faith, Catholic faith, that unites all these groups and peoples in sort of one common thing. So that was what we came up with.
Thank you. And I think you're going to realize in a minute you were the perfect group to go last, because you're the perfect setup for what comes next. So here's the thing. We have been thinking about all sorts of bridges. And as I've reflected on this from the standpoint of what are some of those initial bridges that individual people and the parishes can build. And I think that what you're going to see is the things that I'm going to suggest next actually are going to be kind of broader categories of thinking about much of what you've already been talking about. So this isn't to say, oh, you talked about all these things and now I want to tell you what to do. That's not it at all. But instead, I wanted to try to find a way of inviting you simply to think about 3 initial bridges, knowing that all of what you've discussed really are going to fall into one of these buckets in one way or another, very likely. I want you to know that after we do this next segment with me, then what I'm going to invite you to do is to sit with your parish team. So I know some of you have multiple tables of parish. We're going to try to do this in such a way that will take just a couple of minutes and give people the opportunity to move around if they need to, so that those of you who came from with a parish team have the opportunity to talk with each other. Those of you who are in either twos or came by yourself, you can then sit with others who came in twos or by themselves, so that everyone has some partners to discuss with. So here's the thing. Before we went into our group conversations, we looked at 3 initial things that people are seeking. And again, remember, I said these are broad generalizations. There's always a risk in doing that, because obviously they're not the only 3 things. But they're 3 things that we know that people have certain needs around, that sense of spirituality, that need for a personal connection, and then that opportunity to contribute with meaning to the mission of Christ and the community. And as a result of those 3 needs, I'd like to suggest 3 bridges. And I know you guys have a worksheet in your packet that actually has a process that I'll walk you through in a few minutes. But you might want to take that worksheet out, because there may be some things you kind of want to scribble as we're getting ready for our conversation. So let me borrow that just for a second. So you've got a worksheet that looks like this. And those of you who are Spanish speaking, you have it translated into Spanish so that everybody can jot some things down, and then when the time comes, participate in the conversations. I'd like to suggest 3 bridges that people and parishes can build. The bridge of welcome. I often tell people as I'm out and about that, of all of the things that the people who lead stewardship in our dioceses and parishes have brought to the church, I think one of the greatest gifts is that understanding that we have to be a welcoming people, that we have to offer true hospitality, that if we're going to invite people into a lifetime of conversion and ask them to grow as disciples and as good stewards, they're going to have to feel at home with us. They need to have that sense that they belong. Because there's a lot, we know this, there's a lot that goes into that life of discipleship. And being rooted in that faith community can make a big difference. So we're going to think about welcome in just a couple of ways in a moment. The second bridge, friendship. It sometimes is a little bit perhaps scary to talk to people about relationship. That, people go, I don't know, I'm not ready for relationship. But it's another thing to say, could we be friends? What's it like to take the parents of the children who are preparing for sacraments, and every time we have a parent meeting, we simply have a social component to that. So that then when they're at their schools and they're on the athletic play field, they make that connection between the community of faith and the rest of their lives. What would it be like just to open the possibility? We can't force friendship, but we certainly can lay the platform for people to make those personal connections when they're ready. Take those moments. A friend of mine, Father Bob Hader, talks about entry and re-entry points. Sacramental prep is one of those. Grief support. Our ministry to the homebound. All of those ways in which we reach out with pastoral care. There are opportunities there to really develop good and holy friendships. And then finally, the bridge of sharing. Sharing of ourselves, sharing of our time and our resources, and also sharing of our faith. Years ago, as a parish catechetical leader, We did a regular ongoing intergenerational catechetical process where we offered families the opportunity to come together, and sometimes it was everybody together. Very often it was we would start all together and then we would send people out in age groups, so younger children, middle school children, teens, and then adults. And every year in May, we went to our parents and we said, okay, we're getting ready to plan for the next school year. What would you like to see in faith formation? And almost every year they asked for something about prayer. You know, no matter how many times we have some encouragement to pray. The disciples asked Jesus, teach us to pray. We need that. But one year it happened that the parents said, you know, it's almost like we need to go back to basics. We need things on how to read the Bible. We need how to pray. We need how to share our faith. We need, and so we decided to do a how-to series. And we actually invited one of our seminary professors to come over and do a night about how to find your Bible and maybe even open it. And we did a night on how to pray. And then we did a night on how to fall in love with God and share your faith with others. And it really was just that opportunity for people who had never, ever talked about faith with anyone to sit at table and share a little of their own experience. At the end of the evening, this couple came up to me, and the fellow says to me, okay, so first of all, we're new here. And one of our neighbors told us that if you see a faith formation thing that sounds kind of interesting, you should really go because they're actually pretty fun. And he says, but I have to tell you, she lied to me. She tricked me. I said, she did? He says, yeah, she told me I wouldn't have to say a word. And he said, but if I was invited to come back tomorrow, I would. Because this has been really good. Many of our people are not comfortable sharing their faith because they've never done it. And so that's part of this as well. So 3 bridges: welcome, friendship, and sharing. I'd like to offer just a few thoughts on each one, and then I'm going to walk you through a process for your parish teams so that you can begin to identify your immediate next steps. So the first, welcome. I want to share with you something that Pope Francis said because I think this has a lot of bearing on this. He says, this was in that interview that was published in the first year of his pontificate. And he said, instead of just being a church that welcomes and receives by keeping doors open, let us try also to be a church that finds new roads, that is able to step outside itself and to go to those who do not attend Mass, to those who have quit or are indifferent. The ones who quit sometimes do it for reasons that, if properly understood and assessed, can lead to a return. But that takes audacity and courage. I think a lot of what we need to think about in terms of welcome is about being audacious and courageous. You know, when we take that step out and invite someone and offer that sense of welcome and hospitality, there's a risk on both parts, isn't there? There's a risk for the one who maybe has been away for a while. Well, you know, has anything changed since I left? Those things that led me to leave, you know, do I have any deeper understanding now than I did a few years ago? There's a real risk there. Will I be accepted? Will I be looked down on because I've been away? There's also a risk on our part because we know that we could be turned down. And we have to be prepared for that. No, you know what? I'm just not ready. Okay. But we have to think about how we're going to keep those doors open. How do we offer that sense of welcome without being pushy? You know, but how do we keep that door open so that when that friend or that family member or that coworker, you know, finally says, okay, I want to talk, that we're ready. My young adult son, Mike, got married last September. And his wife was baptized Catholic, but she was in one of those families that really did not actively practice their faith. And so there was this moment where I said to my husband, you know, chances are that wedding is not going to be a Catholic one. And my poor husband said, you're kidding. I said, no, I'm not kidding. And as it happened, Mike and Wendy talked, and then Mike came to me and said, okay, what does this look like? How do you do marriage prep in the church? Because we've decided that we really want a Catholic wedding. And thank God, truly, thank God, they found an understanding priest in an area where there are lots of young adults. And so obviously Mike and Wendy were not the only ones coming to him. But what a blessing that welcome was ready for them when they were ready for it. And there are all kinds of experiences of that, right? I really believe that this thing about welcome and hospitality is as much about who we are as what we do. It's that giving people that sense when they interact with us that we value them, that we want them, that we need them. Not to get busy and help us, but simply to accompany us and to allow us to accompany them on this journey of faith. It's like inviting people into our family. Both of my young adult children have got married in the last 2 years. And I've watched them bring the love of their life to the first family gathering. And what do? Mike did not bring Wendy and say, okay, everybody, this is Wendy, and then he went off and sat in a corner. Mike took Wendy person to person. This is my Aunt Karen, and she was my companion when I first got out of college, and this is my grandma and grandpa, and I am so grateful that we still have our grandparents with us, and on and on and on and on. And then eventually, Wendy, I'm ready to go get a soda. Would you like something to drink? And then he'd leave her for a few minutes, and then he'd come back. And that's a bit of what it's like to invite people into a deeper relationship with our faith community, our family of faith. We're inviting people into the family. They need to know our story. They need to know what it means to be a part of us. St. John Paul, in his pastoral letter at the turn of the century, said to make the church the home and school of communion. That is what we need to give to one another in this time if we wish to be faithful to God's plan and to respond to the world's deepest yearnings. To make the church the home and school of communion. And he goes on to say that when we do that, we will begin to see one another as those who are a part of me. Those who are a part of me. That's welcome. That says, no matter where you are in your life, no matter what those circumstances are that your family's going through, we're going to build that bridge. We want you to be a part of us. The people that are doing all of the research on engagement say they believe that we need about a 4-to-1 ratio. We need 4 engaged people for every 1 actively disengaged person. So that as someone comes into our parish for the first time, or maybe is now, for whatever reason, finding that open mind and heart to being part of us in a different sort of way, they have a 4-to-1 chance of meeting someone who's already engaged, who's going to say, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful that you're here. The other day in parish meeting, someone said, we have Name Tag Sunday. How many of you guys have Name Tag Sunday? Yeah, we have Name Tag Sunday. So once a month, everybody's asked to fill out a name tag. And he said, and I was watching people fill out their name tags the other month, and all of a sudden I realized that a lot of these people were new. And he said, I just had this moment where I thought, we really need to be offering a different kind of welcome to the newcomers. Wouldn't it be great to find some people that have the kind of talent that would encourage them to go and say, I don't think we've met yet, and just introduce themselves? That's welcome. And that's that 4-to-1 thing. We need to work with our leaders. We need to form our leaders so that they understand that if people are going to find an open door in the parish, it's going to be through them. And then we need to form the community. And all of that we do together. Second bridge, friendship. I think there's a lot to be said about simply building relationships within the community. The engagement research is very interesting. It says that a lot of this comes down to what's the feeling that people get when they come to the parish. Now, there is that sort of unquantifiable something, but if you ever visit a parish, when you go on vacation, you know the minute you walk in the door whether or not this is a really welcoming, alive place or whether it's kind of sleepy and, yeah. Our family went to 8 o'clock Christmas Eve Mass, and because my mother-in-law is my mother-in-law, we sat in row 2, and no one sat in row 1. So we were effectively in the front row for Christmas Eve Mass with our 1-year-old grandson. I want you to know that the presider and the commentator both stared at us to the point where I thought, I'm just being paranoid. You know, I'm just being self-conscious. And then after Mass, my son-in-law said, was it just me or was that really uncomfortable? I'm sure they didn't mean it, but I think they've probably had an experience of a child being, Patrick was not misbehaving, but they've probably had that experience of a child misbehaving and sitting right in the front. And so we all felt like we were on the spot. And so, again, just things for us to think about. That building those opportunities for people to get to know each other on a person-to-person basis. Maybe it's groups of like circumstances. I heard things about mom's group, women's group, men's group. I know some of you have heard me tell the story of the Men's Fellowship League that meets on Monday nights at my former parish once a month. And yes, in fact, after the faith formation, they have social time and they watch the game. We also had a father's team that met at 6:03 on Friday morning because 6 o'clock would be just too darn early. And they have 70 guys. Not all of them are there every single week, but they're there. And they know each other. And they support each other. And they encourage each other. Learning groups, prayer groups, all of those ways in which we serve together and share together. Small faith communities. The one thing that can positively impact every single aspect of engagement is belonging to some small group. Not necessarily a small faith group, but a community within the community. Because we're building those friendships. And then finally, the bridge of sharing. We're forming our communities as disciples and stewards. And the more we share that stewardship message, and that call to living discipleship on an ongoing basis, not just one point in the year, but all the time, the more likely we are that people will find that grace to jump in and to be challenged and to be encouraged, to grow and to share. If our primary expectation is every single person here is on a journey of discipleship, then the spirituality around that is the spirituality of stewardship. And that's how we form this evangelizing community. Because then people recognize that one of the greatest gifts they've been given is the gift of faith. So we grow in gratitude. And we share all of our many blessings with one another and with those beyond us. One of the things I didn't mention when we talked about contributing to the mission is, especially among our younger adults, but I believe that this holds true for everyone. Our younger adults will say they want to know not only what is the impact of their giving on the receiver, but what is going to be the impact on them, on the giver. Those of us who have been around stewardship for a very long time, especially, we're really good at saying, you have a call. You're called to give. Absolutely. But what we don't always do is to say, and when you give, let me tell you, there's going to be an impact on you as well. Think about the young people who come back from a mission trip. And how many of them will say, I got so much more than I gave? Yeah. So think about that. How do we kind of enhance and expand the message in such a way as to say the life of the disciple and the steward is a life filled with meaning and is a joyful life, because that's something that compels people to become a part of. I want to share with you, Pope Francis, at one point early in his pontificate, was talking at his general audience, and it happened that he knew that there were going to be groups of young people who were there. And it happened that the gospel that day was the parable of the talents. And this is what he said to them. And again, I just think it holds true for all of us. In this period of crisis today, it is important not to turn in on ourselves, burying our own talent, our spiritual, intellectual, and material riches, everything that the Lord has given us, but rather to open ourselves, to be supportive, to be attentive to others. Set your stakes on great ideals, the ideals that enlarge the heart, the ideals of service that make your talents fruitful. Life is not given to us to be jealously guarded for ourselves, but is given to us so that we may give it in turn. I shared that quote with people in parish in Denver, Colorado last Lent. And at the very end of the evening, a woman came up and she said, "Can you put that one slide back on? Because I want to write down that quote from Pope Francis." And I said, "Sure." And she's scribbling frantically. And I said, "May I ask why?" She said, "I'm 78 years old, and all of my friends are jealously guarding. They're so afraid that they're going to run out of everything that all of a sudden they've become people who are holding tight. They're afraid to give anything anymore." And she said, "I want to go back to them and say, Pope Francis is our age, and he's not jealously guarding." Isn't that great? So here's what I'd like for you to think about in your parish teams. There's a wonderful process called appreciative inquiry. And I love appreciative inquiry, AI, because what AI does is it helps us to think about what's already working, what's already in place. Even if we wanted to, we can't start from scratch. We are in a particular moment of time. It's a really important moment for the life of our church. It's a really important moment for each of us as people who are committed to be followers of Jesus Christ and who are committed to living a life as a good steward. And so what the appreciative inquiry process invites us to do is, first of all, to discover what's already working, what's already happening that we can either learn from or build on. Maybe you have a wonderful women's ministry, and now you're beginning to think about what might we do for the men. Maybe you have something really wonderful that's already happening with our teens, and now you want to say, okay, how do we take the next step and bridge into young adult years? Maybe you already have something wonderful going on with sacramental preparation or sacramental life, and now you want to think about, how do I build a bridge that leads us into deepening that in some way? So that's step one. Step two is, now we begin to dream. What would our ideal be? Now notice under dream, it says be intelligent. Again, this isn't about pipe dreams. This is about, realistically, if we think about life a year from now or 3 years from now, what might it look like? We're not going to build this ideal pie in the sky, but we are going to say we can always do something that's going to help our parish to really live those hopes and dreams that we identified early on. Then we begin to discern. So we know where we are. We know where we want to be. What's our immediate next step? What could we do that would be the beginning of a bridge? And in that way, we're going to be realistic. We're really going to think about, in our particular parish, what could happen? Now, we're not going to finish that step today, because you're going to take this back to your parishes, and you're really going to have some conversation with the other people who lead with you. But we certainly can begin to identify those immediate next steps. The fourth step we're not going to deal with at all today, but that's when we begin to say, okay, so what are we going to do? We've identified where we are. We've looked at where we want to be. We know that these are the initial next steps. Now, who's going to do what when, how. I hope that in this last half hour or so, you have identified at least one immediate next step. I hope that when you leave here today, you know what your next one thing is, whatever that is. And maybe it simply is, we're going to go back and continue the conversation. That's great. But don't let this be just a moment in time. I've had so many people over the years say to me, oh, you know, I came to that workshop a couple of years ago, and we went back and we were all fired up, and then life hit. And that happens. We know that. I'm hoping that maybe you'll take this moment to really begin to think about, where do we go from here? How do we begin to build those bridges? I want to share one final story with you, simply because this is sort of my personal image of much of what we've been talking about. I had the blessing of being at a parish. I was on staff for 12 years. And during our time there, we had to go through a major renovation of our church building. And in fact, the church building had never exactly been finished. And it had the reputation of being the ugliest church in the Archdiocese of Cincinnati. It was concrete cinder block that had never been faced. It was brown with corrugated metal ceiling that literally sucked up the sound before you could even get it out of your mouth. They had put red carpet on the floor that had faded to an ugly shade of orange. And the first third of the chairs, the first third of the space, were chairs that had been red that had faded to a different ugly shade of orange. And it had no windows. They didn't have money to put the windows in, and so they had essentially just bricked in the whole thing. So we recognized that we had a real responsibility to do something, and the longer we taught our people about discipleship and stewardship, the more our people began to say, if we're really going to take this seriously, we have to put first things first, and that means we need to finish the church building that was never finished. So we did that. And in the process of that, one of the things that we were able to do was to put in a large immersion font in the new gathering space in the shape of a cross with 2,200 gallons of water. And it recirculated. So it happened that the first Lent, one of our elect, Stephanie, gave birth to a baby, Sophia. And she and her husband, Dan, came and said, would it be possible for Sophia to be baptized at the Easter Vigil when Stephanie is baptized? And so the first person in the font was Stephanie. And then after she was baptized, she turned and Dan handed her baby Sophia. And she brought Sophia into the font, and Sophia was baptized. I have to tell you, it was a very powerful experience, but in looking at the photos after, what strikes me is the people who surround them. That's who we're called to be. We're called to be people who draw one another deeply to Christ and into the Christian life as disciples. And when we really take that to heart and we build bridges, it's going to change people's lives, and it's going to change the life of the parish. The second person in the font was Sandy. Sandy was one of our teachers in our elementary school. She was a first grade teacher. And all through the time that she was going through the catechumenate, she talked about how she couldn't wait to begin to have the opportunity to share her faith with her students. Sandy had grown up in a Jewish home. And she had actually waited for her parents to pass away before she came into the catechumenate and was baptized. But I have to tell you a story. If you look at the little boy there, I'm convinced he was one of her students. And he's looking like, what's up with this? And we all have those moments too, don't we? Where we just say, you know what? God's grace is here, and I don't always understand it, but I'm going to be fine with that. And I think that's the other lesson for us to keep in mind as we think about this bridge building. One of the beautiful things that Pope Francis says in The Joy of the Gospel, and I can't quote it directly, but he basically says we have to remember that it's the Lord who takes the initiative. I think sometimes we go through days like this and we begin to feel so responsible that we forget that it's the Lord who takes the initiative, that the Holy Spirit is with us, that we are not alone in this. And we need to have that openness, that open mind and open heart to allow ourselves to be vessels for the work of God in people's lives.
Thank you, Lisa. All right, I just want to thank you all once again for being here, for taking the time to go through this process. It's great to see you dream and set goals that are going to affect your communities, hopefully in a very positive way. I also like to thank St. Michael's once again for being our host. This is a wonderful facility, but your hospitality makes it just that much better. So thank you, St. Michael's, for... And last but not least, Lisa and Ernesto, thank you for guiding us through today. Thank you for your leadership and your wisdom, and for guiding us through this process. Thank you to Lisa and Ernesto. And to close, Father Nemesio is going to lead us in a prayer. So I invite him now to come up here, and thank you all once again.
In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Thank you, Lord, for this wonderful day, well spent here as a way of growing in gratitude and living more generously in the faith. We ask you to bless each one of us and bless the stewardship and development, the youth office, the young adults office, evangelization and catechetical ministry of the diocese. Bless each one of those who made this day truly a day of learning and a day of greater commitment to discipleship and stewardship of everyone. The Lord be with you. May Almighty God bless you all, the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit.